Good morning, Liberty. It is Wednesday morning, February 27th, 2019, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time here on the West Coast. My name is Michael Boldin, broadcasting to you live through our YouTube channel at the 10th Amendment Center. As we do every single Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. So good morning to you, good afternoon, good evening. Whenever you happen to be tuning in, I'm very grateful for you spending some time with me today. On this show, we're going to talk about war powers, not in the detail specifically about the constitutional structure, which I did in an episode back in December, basically commemorating the loss of constitutional war powers, the declaration of war from Congress on December 7th, which was in response to, the declaration of war against Japan in response to Pearl Harbor was on December 8th of 1941. And then the last declaration of war actually came in June of 1942 against Bulgaria, Hungary, and I think Romania. So that show will give you all the kind of the details of the founders' view. I'll get into that just briefly, but I want to talk today about something that I've been seeing ramp up. Now, the Washington Times, I think, not the Post, but the Times ran an article recently talking about how some insiders, probably neocon war hawks who hate the Constitution, our liberty, and basically everything other than their own power, were proposing or suggesting that the 2001 Authorization to Use Military Force, AUMF, now left open the possibility that the president or the executive branch, whether it was President Trump or a future president, could, on their own decision, start hostilities or engage in attack, military conflict with the country of Iran. But I've noticed that this has been happening for a long time. So I'm going to get into details on that, talk about that. We'll look at the AUMF itself from 2001. And then also something that it cites, the War Powers Resolution of 1973, which I did a video on sometime about a year ago, and you can find that here on YouTube, but I also put a link to that. Of course, as I always say, all the links are in the show notes, at least most of them that I thought of in advance here on YouTube. And then, of course, all of our archives over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/Good Morning Liberty. You can find the show notes for today's show. You can find all of our previous shows. I think we're somewhere around 90 episodes. I don't do it like most podcasters do because we're doing these live broadcasts on YouTube, but somewhere around 90, close to 100 episodes so far. And I think that's pretty awesome. Maybe I'll start keeping track at some point. But we have that, the archives, plus all the other platforms where you can subscribe and follow the show, whether it's just through your own RSS reader here on YouTube, BitChute, BitTube, and then the podcast versions, iTunes, Spotify, etc. And I appreciate all the feedback and ratings that people have been giving the show. It really, really is very encouraging. I'm very grateful for that. So before getting into the details of this episode, hi to my friends out in the live chat. Alan Drone, haven't seen you. I don't know if I've seen you here on the live show. Good to see you, sir, and thank you for all your support. Larry Clark, Denver Libertarian, Ward Lawrence, Joseph Standridge, Alan Mosley. Make sure you guys watch The Gold Standard with Alan Mosley as well. Denver Libertarian says, hello all. Can't always chat, but AUMF discussions always get me fired up. Looking forward to this one. Yeah, me too, because what they do, I guess the short version, what they do is instead of following the Constitution, they pass this kind of pansy thing. I don't know how else to, maybe, is that a bad term? I don't know. They pass this real wussy resolution where they don't take responsibilities, and the short version is they pass the buck to the executive branch. And as we'll kind of briefly recap from my episode back in December, they're not allowed to do that. In fact, they're not allowed to do that in any area. So Congress has delegated the power to establish post offices and post roads. That doesn't mean the judiciary has the power to do that. And if the judiciary has delegated the power to hear cases and controversies, the president doesn't have that authority. So when the founders actually chose one branch to delegate a specific power to, they did it for a specific reason, not so they could just pass the buck and hand it off to something else. And the same goes to when they chose to not delegate a power in the first place, they did it for a specific reason in most situations. We have a lot of documentary history behind this, showing where in many situations they considered something and said, no, this is bad. And I think this is also covered in that episode in regards to war powers when it comes to the executive branch. So let's get to it. First, I want to also, again, mention that episode. Here's the link to it. A Day That Will Live in Infamy, the beginning of the end of constitutional war powers. That was our Good Morning Liberty episode back on December 12, 2018. So if you haven't listened to that and you want to get the details, I encourage you to do that. Again, show notes, links, all that stuff is there. Now, just a brief recap. I'm just going to cite James Madison. I know a lot of people talk about him as being the father of the Constitution. I do believe that's a misnomer, but obviously he's well respected. Basically, when it comes to a constitutional view, how things are supposed to be structured, anybody talking today, yours truly included, is not an authority in comparison to James Madison. I mean, he was so involved. Jefferson, who wasn't even there, is more of an authority on the Constitution because they were living at the time and they were involved in the whole process. They were involved in the implementation, the ratification, all this stuff. So they know what they were trying to do and they know it much better than we do. We're only trying to uncover it. So we're researchers. That's it. And the best that I can do is relay what I learned from what they taught me to you. So James Madison, I think, is a pretty good go-to guy on this. He talked about it pretty significantly. And I don't find anywhere where anyone was really disagreeing with him. I mean, even Hamilton was on board with this view. And just to review, Congress has been delegated the power to declare war. This is in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. And here's what James Madison had to say about it. Quote, the Constitution supposes what the history of all governments demonstrates, that the executive is the branch of power most interested in war and most prone to it. It has accordingly, with studied care, vested the question of war in the legislature, Congress. Now, when he says the executive, a lot of times we talk about the executive as being just the president, but we know the executive branch today is massive, and it includes all that deep state crap, whatever you want to call it. It includes the Pentagon, all of this. So it's not necessarily just the president. I'm not trying to necessarily target the president, but I'm also not trying to cover it up that it could also be the president. And not this president, not the previous president, not the next president, but all executive power. And that's what Madison was saying. Now, this is a guy who, at least when people even disagreed with him, they were like, oh, well, if we want to understand the nature of government, Madison is our guy because he is the guy who studied all the history. Now, I don't think much has changed about these fundamental principles about the nature of government since from the 18th century to today. Suddenly, executive power wasn't interested in war. I don't know if anyone could make that case. So it still holds true. And mind you, I think the key phrase here is that Madison said specifically, not only is this the case, that the executive branch is most prone to war and most interested in it for many reasons, not only is it most prone to it, but they studied it in detail and they considered it with studied care, vested the question. You don't see him saying that about a lot of other things that have been delegated to the federal government. Hey, we have studied care, vested the question of war with the legislature and specifically not the executive branch. Now, the question of war means, again, just to recap and go to that episode for more details, and I'll cut this short here in a moment, whether or not there's going to be hostilities. These days, they say everything is not a war and therefore they don't have to do it. But we know the founding dictionaries of the day and the founders themselves and legal and lay dictionaries, the general view was basically violence by a sovereign over opposition. So if a sovereign government, now sovereignty is never given up, it's actually held by the people, but when the representatives of the sovereign conduct violence over the opposition of somebody in another country, that is a war. Whether it's a single bomb, a single ship landing, whatever it may be, these are all acts of war. And I do have it on my list specifically to cover what a lot of people talk about with Jefferson and the Barbary Pirates. I'm going to tell you the kind of backstory on that one for those who are interested. So Madison goes further. Not only does he say that with studied care they vested the question of war with the legislature rather than the executive branch, he goes on further and really hammers this home. The executive has no right in any case to decide the question whether there is or is not cause for declaring war. So in no situation, ever, unless it's physically repelling an attack that's happening, or an invasion. And I know my friend Bob Brewer is often talking about repelling and protecting the country from invasion. And this is something I'm doing more research on as well, not just myself, but Dave Benner and Mike Meharry here on our team. What constitutes an actual invasion? But as far as like Syria, Iran, Yemen, we know for a fact none of those countries are invading the U.S. So that isn't even a question. So again, the executive has no right in any situation to decide whether or not there's going to be a change of status from peace or even tension to war. Period. Never. That's not me saying it. That's James Madison. In any case, like, he couldn't be more clear on that. I think that's very important as a reminder. Now, moving forward, let's talk about what's going on with the neocon pigs, we'll call them that, trash. I said it in a Facebook message to a friend this morning who had asked a question. I said, I got to do a podcast show on some neocon trash agitating for war with Iran. So let's take a look. This is a website that I recommend you either read with caution or totally ignore. JustSecurity.org is kind of the somewhat mainstream establishment left kind of answer to Ben Witt's. If you geek out on this kind of stuff, most of the national security bloggers and legal scholars have been kind of in the John Yoo type, the neocon, Dick Cheney, Elliot Abrams, George Bush administration mold. This mentality, the executive always has all power, and war. Really bad stuff. More surveillance. So this is an interesting alternative that I think is really good to read if you really want to get in deep. Unfortunately, most of what they post these days, even if they're having an interesting discussion, like, for example, I read something recently about who was Trump's lawyer, Cohen or whatever. And instead of focusing on that at the end, the guy ends up with, well, what I'm really concerned with is Russia. So that'll give you a perspective of where they come from. Now, this article specifically does not seem to include anything about Russia as being the great concern, but specifically talking about the authorization to use military force, the AUMF from 2001, and how some people are agitating to use it against Iran. And here's how it starts. And this is Steve Vladek and Tess Bridgman who write this. I think they're very good scholars. I think there is a lot of scholars who are bad. So like John Yoo, I think, is one of the worst neocon. One of these guys, maybe he's not even a neocon, but he definitely is a modern-day Hamiltonian to the nth degree who wants the executive branch to basically have unchecked power, in my view. So, Just Security, Steve and Tess write, Monday's Washington Times. Now, this is last week Monday. Monday's Washington Times included a breathless exclusive report titled, Iran-Al-Qaeda Alliance May Provide Legal Rationale for U.S. Military Strikes. In the piece, they continue, the Times strings together a series of paraphrased comments from unidentified Trump administration officials and congressional and legal sources to suggest that the 2001 authorization for the use of military force, the AUMF, quote, may now provide a legal rationale for striking Iranian territory or proxies. So they're making the case. Now, whether it's propaganda or not, somebody is making that case. Whether it comes from in the administration or some deep state hack is trying to make the administration look bad, I don't know. No one really knows, but someone is certainly making the case. Maybe it's the Washington Times. Who knows? Looking for people that will say things that fit a narrative. I don't know. And I don't really care as much. I mean, I guess I should care where it's coming from. But the fact is that it is coming from an establishment source that is agitating for this. And it isn't a one-time thing. I think the article kind of ignores the fact that this isn't just the first time this is mentioned. And I'll get to that in a moment as well. So they go on to just kind of get the impact on this. Pause on that for a moment. The Times piece basically suggests that if President Trump wanted to, personally, mind you, he could invoke the AUMF of 2001, the terrorist attacks of September 11th, that was the response, to start a war with Iran, and he could do it tomorrow or today. They're saying, okay, they can just start bombing Iran because September 11th. Now, this has almost become a meme. Maybe it is. I mean, drug war, September 11th. Drug war funded, illegal drugs fund the terrorists. If you talk to the wrong people, it funds the terrorists. If we don't spy on everyone's phones and texts, it helps the terrorists. We can't stop the terrorists and people are going to die. This is the same type of thing I heard when I was doing duck and cover drills in the 80s in grade school, when in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in the early 80s, here I am a child, and like once a week, we had to go hide under our desks with alarms blaring through the entire city because the Russians might drop a nuke on our Catholic grade school. That's what I heard. So I was living in fear. And this is more of that type of a fear-mongering. Because a tragic thing happened in the past, an evil thing happened in the past, a mass murder happened in the past, now no one gets to be free, and therefore we have to have conflict with everyone on Earth. That's the message I get. I mean, it sounds pretty nasty to me. So they go on and say, the main claim behind the Times story, it seems, is that Iran is increasingly harboring, that's the technical term from the AUMF, harboring Al-Qaeda or Al-Qaeda by providing sanctuary to certain Al-Qaeda officials in Iran and through indirect financial support. They're not even directly giving them cash, but supposedly Al-Qaeda, which is basically decimated. I mean, you could probably have one person saying, I'm Al-Qaeda, and then getting money from a country, and then that means the U.S. is automatically in a state of war with them, and they could be bombed. And this isn't even covering, I mean, they're not even saying direct financial support. So that in and of itself, I think, is pretty much bonkers. It's really, really bad. So let's take a look at this. They go on and they talk about this. The article, I think, it gets distracted because they're talking about whether or not they actually have an argument. Are they actually harboring them? Is Al-Qaeda still around? All the technicality that actually validates this actual, maybe they're doing this on purpose and maybe that's part of the problem. They're actually validating this power by saying, well, we're only arguing that this is a nonsensical claim. They're not saying that, they're not striking at the root saying, whoa, wait a second. Even if they are harboring Al-Qaeda, even if they are doing things that violate the AUMF of 2001 passed by the United States Congress, if another country is violating a resolution passed by the U.S. government, it doesn't give you authority to just bomb them without the people's representatives making that choice. The whole idea, again, according to James Madison, and I agree with Madison. I mean, if someone wants to disagree with me, take it up with James Madison. I'm on James Madison's side. The people who aren't are not. I think that's just pretty straightforward. But Madison says in any case, in no case, even so, in any case, he said, the executive has no right in any case to decide the question whether there is or is not cause for declaring war. And declaring in that time means, it doesn't, declaring war didn't mean actually having to make a declaration or send a letter. It means changing the status from peace to war. You could declare war with a bomb. So that declares that you're at war, and that was widely understood, for example, Vattel, etc. So in any case, there's no way that the executive can do this. But yet, we're hearing, according to the Washington Times, that if Iran is supposedly harboring Al-Qaeda or supposedly giving indirect financial support, I don't even know what that means. And I haven't read that Washington Times piece. But let's set aside, I'm not even going to debate that. Let's just say, and I keep saying supposedly, okay, Iran is harboring Al-Qaeda. They're harboring thousands of them. I don't think anyone would make that claim, but let's say they're not even just giving them direct money. They're actually paying for their hotel rooms or something. They built them a training camp. That's direct financial support. Well, that's in any case. Even in that case, the executive does not have the right, according to James Madison, to make the decision of whether or not the U.S. will start bombing Iran. Because that means all that does is create a situation for perpetual war. Perpetual. Because instead of revisiting and saying, okay, things may be different now. People who are part of Al-Qaeda I don't know, maybe they're not even trying to attack the U.S. anymore. Who knows? Maybe they don't exist. I don't know. It should be up for a debate. And it's supposed to be a country, a representative republic, where the government is acting. I know you guys listening are going to be chuckling and say, Boldin, this is nuts. It's supposedly, in theory, is that they're supposed to be doing the will of the people. Now, you and I know that the only person that can do the will of you is you or someone who is contracted to do exactly what you say. But as far as governments go, the structure is as close as you can get to that, or has been done, I believe. And the point behind that is that if you're going to have something that is going to cost lives, money, lack of liberty, because Madison also went on and he said war is the most dreaded dangers to liberty because it breeds armies and debts and taxes. And armies, debts, and taxes are the known instruments for bringing the many under the domination of the few. That's Madison's view. I don't think anyone disagreed with him, at least from what I've read. And I've read a lot on this. So even if they are doing this, it should still be, are the people going to decide, does there need to be bombing? Or does there need to be a state of war? And then it's up to the president to decide how that's going to happen. That's it. So that's another interesting point, too. Congress doesn't just get to say, you get to go, you get to drop a bomb on this city or this camp. Congress says there's a state of war, and then it's up to the president to make that happen. And they can't just not be in that state of war. So that's a little off track there. So they go on with this kind of talk about whether or not the case that they're making is right or wrong. They actually are suggesting that this is a trial balloon. And this is how they write. First, it seems crystal clear that the story is nothing more than a trial balloon, something that someone in the Trump administration is publicly planting to see what reaction, if any, it provokes. And if we're talking about foreign policy, I think the president himself is actually well known for that as a tactic. I was very, very concerned that he was going absolutely nuts in regards to North Korea at first. He was promising to raid hellfire down on North Korea. And it seems to be playing out that he was doing this as, act tough, get them to come to the table because they don't want that. They see you as nuts. I think this was the crazed dictator strategy that Richard Nixon used. Not to say that it's necessarily good or not, but this is a tactic. And at least in North Korea, it seems to be working. The problem is when it doesn't work and you don't back that up. If you do back it up, you've done some really bad stuff. And if you don't, then it never works again. So you can get away with it as long as it keeps working. Maybe they're doing that with Venezuela and others. I don't know. So I believe that this is a tactic that the Trump administration does use. It's possible that he brought John Bolton on to back that up. I don't know. If I'm thinking of him maybe trying to accomplish something good, certainly. If not, I don't know. It seems like it. So they're suggesting that maybe this is a trial balloon. Let's see how people respond to the idea of using the Al-Qaeda, AUMF, to have a full-scale war with Iran. And full scale certainly is no different than less scale. It doesn't have to be invasion, but it could be start running sorties. It could be sanctions, all kinds of different things. And they say, again, second, and at a more basic level, the fact that we're even having this conversation is yet further proof, alongside years of previous examples, of the desperate need for Congress to revisit the 2001 AUMF, a statute that is now older than some of the soldiers we're sending into harm's way under its open-ended but not limitless terms. I think it's limitless because of how it's going to be applied. We see, I think in 30 years, if they don't ever actually repeal this or amend it to say this is an end date or it has to apply to specific areas or whatever, I think in time, eventually, it will be seen as limitless. And just security is really not recognizing the power of this thing. Now, just pointing out, again, this just happened February 2019, this so-called trial balloon. But I don't think the trial balloon just started. I think it's been going for quite some time. And if you, here I'm thinking something I didn't include in the show notes, but when I talked about Syria and media propaganda, the withdrawal there, I talked about how Trump had been floating the idea behind the scenes and then publicly about pulling out of Syria for almost a year, if not longer. And then in December of 2018, all of a sudden all the media, when he finally got frustrated when no one was doing what he said he wanted them to do, he said, you guys, finally, he said, get out by October. And when they didn't, then he went public, said, okay, we're done. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like he's fully withdrawing. And it seems like a drawdown rather than a withdrawal. We'll see. But then they said, oh, okay, this is a rash, out-of-nowhere decision. But it isn't. And this as well with Iran has been going on for a while. And I just wanted to show you this quick search that I did. And if you just do a search for Iran, AUMF, you could see June 4th of 2018. Same website, just security. Will Trump administration claim Congress authorized force against Iran? Trump administration. AUMF update could give Trump green light for Iran attacks. They're talking about Iran in relationship to the AUMF, whether it needs an update or whether it can be used already. So they've been talking about this. They've been planting this since early to mid 2018. I don't think it's new. I think this has been pushed behind the scenes in the community that ends up making these types of decisions or trying to push propaganda to form public opinion or backing in support of these things. So this has been building for quite a while. And that's why I wanted to do the show on this, because once I saw it again, I'm like, man, this is, to me, getting very dangerous and very serious. Now, let's take a look at that Public Law 107-40 from the 107th Congress in 2001, September 18th, 2001, 1 week after 9/11. The authorization to use military force is barely a page long. It's really easy peasy. If you understand legislative drafting, a resolution generally includes a bunch of whereas clauses. And this is how it starts. You know, September 11th, 2001, acts of treacherous violence were committed, etc. The whereas clauses just basically set the stage. They do not hold legal effect. It's the statement of intent. It's like a preamble, basically. And so then in Section 1 of the Act, this is after the enacting clauses. I'll just read it. This is the key part. Authorization for use of United States Armed Forces. In general, that the President is authorized to use all necessary and appropriate force against those nations, organizations, or persons he determines, planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks that occurred on September 11, 2001, or harbored such organizations or persons in order to prevent any future acts of international terrorism against the United States by such nations, organizations, or persons. Did you guys get that? I'm assuming everyone got that. I'm assuming everybody got that. And, I'm looking in the live chat and I'm getting a few people saying connection issues. Ward Lawrence is getting a buffering interruption. I don't know if anyone else is. It says when I'm looking at the stream health, YouTube gives me a full green light. It's green, which is great. And I'm looking at the amount of data I'm transferring, and it's really high. I'm on a fiber connection. YouTube tells me it's good. And It's not even yellow. Yellow, when I've seen a few times, that means maybe there's like a little slowness in the ping on the on my connection or something, or maybe somewhere in the hops that go through. But YouTube's telling me all's good, so maybe somewhere out there in the network. Denver Libertarian said, I closed and reopened a new window, and it's good here. So hopefully you guys can just do that. Larry Clark says he's good. Richard Roberts says YouTube doesn't appear to be having issues, just this channel. Okay, hopefully it works out. If not, it'll certainly be up in the archives as well. I apologize for that. So again, did you guys get this? In the authorization to use military force against anybody, basically, they say the president can determine whoever he determines. Now, if we compare that to what James Madison said, the executive has no right in any case to decide the question of whether there is or not cause for declaring war. So James Madison says never, and never, not in any case, also includes if Congress tells him that he can do it. So what a constitutional president, which George Bush certainly was not, would have done would have been to veto that. Or just not exercise it. And if they overrode him, he said, no, I'm not going to do this. And would have gone to his bully pulpit and said, there's no way I'm going to do this. Not happening. So that is just straight up redelegating, taking a power that was delegated to Congress, Congress being a wimp, not taking responsibility. Congress should have just named the countries. They should have said, Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, whoever they wanted to do. Like, that doesn't mean they were necessarily right in doing. Even you can debate the politics of it. But if they wanted to actually do their job and they thought that war should exist against Al-Qaeda, then they should have done the research where Al-Qaeda was. I think everybody was pretty clear that it was Afghanistan before Rumsfeld and company decided it was Iraq. So then they should have declared war against Afghanistan. And then, if they move to another country, then they just pass another resolution to have a state of war against that country, or tell that country, look, if you continue harboring these people, we'll have a state of war and then we're going to waste you. That's how you do it. It didn't take them long. It took them 7 days to come up with this weak nonsense. They could easily have gone faster than that. They could have had something the very next day. That's what happened in a time when there wasn't text messaging. There weren't even jet engines in 1941, and somehow Congress assembled on December 8th, 1941, and was able to have a declaration of war against Japan. So they certainly can do it. A lot of people say, oh, it can't happen fast enough, but it certainly can, without a doubt. So they basically, in the AUMF, I make the case that in and of itself, it's unconstitutional and authorizes nothing, because what it's doing is it's attempting to violate the Constitution's strict structure that Congress makes the decision. Congress doesn't get to say, President, something bad happened. You decide who we're going to have war with and when. No. Congress decides if it's going to be Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, whoever it may be, and you can make the case for or against that, and the people can debate that, and then it goes from there. And once they declare that war, then the president is required to carry it out. Now, I'm assuming if they declared war under a constitutional structure, if they declared war and the president actually chose not to, said, I'm not going to do this, it'd be likely that that president would get impeached. And I think that's how the whole process is supposed to go. So I also included a link here. Maybe I didn't put it in the show notes. Let me see if I can add it real quick. George Bush issued a signing statement with this. Most of his signing statements seemed to add more power. Instead, I just thought it was interesting to read where he was very happy with what Congress did because, of course, he loved executive power. He wanted to make the decisions. He was, remember, I am the decider. He wanted to do that. This is a psychopath, in my opinion. Now, the other part of the AUMF, and I'm going to close this up shortly here, claims that this is constitutional. It doesn't even say constitutional. Well, I guess so. It's consistent with Section 8 A1 of the War Powers Resolution that Congress declares that this section is intended to constitute specific statutory authorization, blah, 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 with the War Powers Resolution of 1973. And I included a link here with the War Powers Resolution. And I also included a link to our video on this, Unconstitutional, the War Powers Resolution of 1973. You can read through those at your convenience. But basically what the War Powers Resolution is saying is that the president is authorized to engage in hostile activity, introduce military forces in a combat action against another country without a declaration of war, as long as he reports back to Congress within 60 days. And after 60 days, if Congress isn't okay with it, I think he has another 30 to end it. Now, I read what James Madison had to say. I've read the Constitution, and it doesn't say Congress shall have the power to declare war unless it's only for 60 days or less. Now, in modern times here, many of these war actions, these wars, are done in weeks. I mean, they lay waste with massive air power. How long did the Libya bombings last? That was a war that Obama did unconstitutionally through just his own executive choice. That wasn't for 90 days. He was just, you can go in and just crush another nation with tons of air power, and then it's done. Oh, well, it's not 60 days, so it's not a war. I mean, maybe we destroyed the entire infrastructure of the country, but that doesn't count because it was only a week or 29 days. It's okay. 39 days, whatever. And that's absolutely nonsense. Again, citing James Madison, that he said the executive has no right in any case, even if it was 60 days or less. So that, to me, is really kind of the game changer there. So looking back at the live chat, it looks like a few people did a refresh. Ward Lawrence, EHP training said locked up here, had to restart. So that must have been something between my stream and our channel on YouTube. I'm not sure, because it still is showing me that the stream health is green. Good. Your viewers are happy is what YouTube is telling me. And then through my software, I'm seeing no drop frames. But of course, this is a great time to remind everybody that we post all of the archives over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/goodmorningliberty. And if it turns out, and I guess I'll scrub through the show, maybe there's some stuttering even in the archive on YouTube. But if not, then we know there was something going on in their servers. But if there is problems in it, we post the show to other channels as well. We have a BitTube, which is kind of like a Napster for video. It's peer-to-peer. And then also BitChute. And then we do the podcast versions, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, and through our RSS feed. John Hindery says the deep state is shadow banning this discussions. Lion King says, well, I'm from Iran, and we'll fight to death if that wicked country does that. Legal maxim of contracts, delegata potestas, non-potest. Oh, I guess if it hasn't. Oh, that which was delegated cannot be further delegated. I've actually not seen that legal maxim. And legal maxims always come from Latin, at least to the founders. For example, and this isn't a legal maxim, but our motto is Concordia res parve crescunt, which means small things grow great by concord. This was written by the penman of the Revolution, John Dickinson, who always talked about, and this is a side discussion, but it basically guides our work here. Basically, each small step leads to something greater in time. Again, I hope you guys found this interesting, insightful. To me, it really riles me up, like Denver Libertarian had to say early on in the show. If you like what I'm doing here, if you like what we're doing as a team at the 10th Amendment Center, please smash that like button. Continue leaving comments. Lots of great discussion here. I'm going to catch up and read back through a lot of the live discussion that I've been missing from Richard, Larry, Joseph, EHP, Denver, everybody else. I really appreciate all the feedback. And even if you're watching later on and you've got some thoughts, I do like hearing what you have to say. Please leave some follow-up information in the comments. Let me know what you think. or if you've got ideas for new shows, whatever it may be. I think on Friday's show, I'm going to talk about the new gun control measures that are be pushing through the Imperial House of Representatives in Washington, D.C., possibly unless something changed. But in the near future, I definitely want to cover that. So if you've got ideas of things that you'd like me to cover as well, feel free to email me at team@10thamendmentcenter.com. Again, I don't always get back, but I do appreciate all the feedback. And of course, thank you so much for spending some time with me today. Thank you for commenting. Thank you for liking. Thank you for sharing. All that good stuff. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time here at Good Morning Liberty. Have a great day.